It's November 14th. Do another election update here, kind of where we are right now. I have a few things that might be of interest. Um, First of all, we've followed the path of the various lawsuits that have been filed, and so far they haven't been gaining a lot of traction. I think that Trump won one in Pennsylvania, about a small number of ballots, about maybe 3,000 ballots that would have to be, separated. That's a good one, but that's not enough to change it in the big picture. It's a step in the right direction, I guess. Otherwise, it seems like he's being rebuffed just about everywhere at these circuit and district court levels. And I don't think that surprised me too much. I have my doubts that most of these people are in the districts in which all the fraud occurs. They're part of that political environment. So they would probably become very unpopular people in that area if they ruled any other way. You've got to get to the appellate levels and all the Supreme Court levels in both state and particularly federal, I think, to get the kind of results you want to get. And so, I mean, you have to get to a level where the people have the authority and confidence to make a real decision, I think. So that's one thing. And I think that's an ongoing effort, so we'll see where that goes. And I would say that two ways of looking at that. One is that, and this is the optimistic one, that they're working on something big, and I'll get to what that could be later, and I emphasize could, or they're just stalling for time. I don't know exactly what they think. Maybe they're just hoping one of the judges will take it and go with it, and they'll have an opening. I'm not sure, but that's kind of it. Now, another interesting thing on the fraud issue that's developed recently. There's a guy on the Twitter that goes by the handle Gray Wolf Ron, who has sent me a message saying that his uncle and a former roommate he found that they both voted, and that his uncle had passed away, so obviously he didn't vote, and I was pretty sure that the roommate had left the state, didn't vote illegally either. So it looks like he found two cases of the voter fraud real close to himself, and so I guess that's something else. If you know how to get into your local election databases and stuff and see if anybody you know, or close relative or friend that's left the state or something had voted, that might be an interesting thing to see. And if it's a friend that left the state, you might check to see if they really voted or not. I'm not, but that's. And I guess that'd be interesting if we could get that information to the Trump campaign. That would be good. And I think also, send Twitter messages or emails to Fox News and tell them what you found. I guess OAN, of course, and Newsmax. But Fox needs to be really have their cage rattled a little bit. I mean, we're all very upset with the way they've handled this, complete with a premature calling of Arizona to just the general attitude of dismissing all the claims of fraud without doing any investigation of themselves. That is very upsetting to many of the conservatives who I think feel that they're, the backbone of Fox News, and all of a sudden they're getting this kind of shabby treatment. This could be because Fox, like all the other news, is part of the corporate media, and there's a lot of, I think, corporate system level pressure to go this way. I mean, look, even Facebook, who we are pretty upset with some of the things they did, but remember, they were under pressure to do more over the summer from various corporate entities and so forth, who were withholding advertising on them if they didn't be more biased against Trump. So I think there's a lot of pressure, boycotts and stuff, and that may be, and plus, Fox does want to be able to cover the potential Biden administration here, so they don't want to ace themselves out. So I'm not excusing it, but I'm just trying to explain what I think could be why they're doing what they're doing. Whereas the opinion people in the evening, Tucker Carlson, Sean Hannity, Laura Ingraham, and Mark Levin on the weekend, they're still hanging in there pretty hard line, I think. So I don't know it's hard to know. It seems like a lot of this is which show is doing it. But I think that's kind of an interesting point to keep raising these issues. Now, something else has come up I want to address here. Yesterday, there's a company called Scytl, SCY, I think it is Skype, something like that. I may be mispronouncing it. I'll put a link to an article on here, but it is a company in Germany and allegedly a server was seized in a joint operation between German police and the U.S. Army, of all things. And the server is supposed to be associated with Dominion, who's the company that did a lot of the vote counting in many of the states in question. And the question then is, well, the thing about this is that the software on this, if I understand, has a historically tainted legacy. And that is, it comes out of Venezuela and was used there to do vote fraud, to rig the vote so that the Noriega and successor administrations stayed in power. And then they eventually, apparently, the company Dominion subcontracts them for the software they're using. And allegedly, this is not being used that way in the United States, that feature isn't being used, or I've heard claims it's still present. I don't know. Point is, there's also questions about the way their machines work and how accurate they are and other things of that sort. But at any rate, if this server, the allegation has been raised in some of the conservative websites, which are out there, Gateway Pundit and things of that sort, are saying that this was used to count votes in the U.S. election. And if that is now in possession of the U.S. government, that leads to some interesting questions, right? I mean, is there any evidence on the server that votes were switched? I mean, it wouldn't take a very big percentage in some of these states to do it. And that, that is an interesting, issue to consider, because at this point it's becoming increasingly hard to prove in a short time available that enough votes were actually stolen that would have impacted the election. You can always say, well, I saw somebody run 50 ballots through the machine 5 times or something like that, or that sort of thing. But a lot of the evidence has been lost in the way it's been processed and not handled properly. So, it's all mixed in with legitimate votes. It's hard to segregate it. But if, in fact, the way it was done in part was actually flipping votes by computer after they were already counted electronically, then conceivably one might be able to go through the data there maybe and find that feature was in the software and it was being done selectively in certain states. I don't know. It would take some kind of computer forensic analysis to produce this. But the thing is there anything to this story at all? I mean, there's a picture, it looked like, of German police, like a SWAT team, by a server in one of the articles. So, and Louis Gormant, the congressman from Texas, said that in fact is sort of said this did occur. So, and he's presumably in contact with the Trump people. So it's hard to know what the status of that is. There's a big if here. I mean, if it really happened, if it really is related to the election, or is it just related to some other fraudulent activity that the U.S. government, probably the Justice Department, was interested in. The fact the Army was involved in the seizure is kind of interesting rather than FBI. And some people have drawn inferences to why the Secretary of Defense was recently fired, that maybe he wanted to put a loyalist in charge of the DOD so that the Army data would actually get to the right people. There's a lot of speculation in what I'm saying here, and I'm not asserting. I'm just letting you know that that's what I'm thinking about now, and hopeful that something could come of this. And then the final question is, will the analysis actually show that, in fact, votes were being switched with a software, or is this another, false lead? So anyway, wait to see on that. I'll try to put a link to that below this too, so you can look up the information on it. The other thing that's kind of come out is this Beneford thing I mentioned earlier, which is a analytical technique that they use to evaluate potential fraud. And there's a British guy that's done an analysis, and he took some case where somebody was looking at the votes in Chicago. And of course, he's against the idea that he's an anti-person, obviously anti-Trump person, but he's a statistician. He does analysis of this and shows that analysis doesn't really show anything when they apply it to Chicago, and that that it was just what way people were voting in Chicago and so forth. Okay, that's all well and good, but of course, does anybody think that the voter fraud was in Chicago? That is, there may be voter fraud in Chicago about local elections and state elections and maybe even congressional races, but I don't think it was about Trump versus Biden, because, I mean, it was a foregone conclusion that Biden was going to win Illinois. So I said, I posted a link on a comment on his thing and said, you really need to do an analysis of places like Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Arizona, and cities like Milwaukee and Detroit and Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, Atlanta, and Phoenix, and see what you get there, because that's where the action is, not in Chicago on this one. So, at any rate, I'll put a link to that down too if anybody wants to look at it. Remember, you won't be happy with what he's saying. He is a competent statistical guy, but I think it's like an irrelevant comment, frankly, to what we're really talking about. But I did kind of look into seeing what the other side might be saying about it, and I think it's, the other thing is just the issue of the level of voting, the turnout on the Biden side just seems way high. I mean, you have a very lackluster candidate running a very lackluster campaign, and he gets such spectacular turnout like we've never seen before. And that just seems a little strange. I mean, the Trump people are very, very motivated, and they did do a spectacular amount of, I mean, they really exceeded the 16 level by about 7 million votes or something already. I mean, so they did a spectacular job, and the fact that these guys beat it with such a lackluster candidate, I guess we could attribute it to social media and just mail-in voting, I guess, and very loose absentee voting without any, the COVID crisis thing. But it does seem a little strange, when you have like Biden getting better turnout even than Obama got in some key areas. The other problem I'm having with that, and I want to mention this briefly, is in the polling beforehand showed an unusual amount of support for Trump among the African American community. Okay, so all of a sudden, this doesn't materialize at all. In fact, the opposite materializes in a real election. Now, it is possible, especially with the Rasmussen poll, since it's automated, I guess it could have been white people claiming they were black to the pollster. Otherwise, I guess the other possibility is they were thinking about doing it, but when it came down to really doing it, they really couldn't bring themselves to really doing it, which is possible. And so, but at any rate, I find that interesting too, that we were supposed to get a better than average black vote, and in fact, it's exactly these communities that kind of really dwarfed all performance levels ever against Trump. Then again, I guess it could be they were lying, saying they were for Trump and actually were for Biden 100%. Who knows? I just throw that out for consideration. Now, on the fraud issue, finally, I want to, ideas cross my mind here just because of all the Antifa and BLM activities we see, such as just what we have this evening looking at that happened in D.C. Throughout the country, these groups exist, and they've been able to stage massive amounts of protests, violence, riots. Well, when we look at who could do the voter fraud, isn't this the obvious suspects? I mean, seriously, if they're willing to go out and attack people, fight the police, set things on fire, whatever, all the things they do, why not engage in a little voter fraud? Especially if you can do it with loose absentee ballots with no real solid verification on them. I mean, it looks to me like that's a very serious possibility that that's who's doing it, as those radical groups have done a lot of voter fraud. And that could explain a lot of what we're seeing here, I think. And obviously, these are very hardcore anti-Trump people. They're people that are going to commit crimes. And they generally figure they'll never get caught. And so I think that's a good set of suspects. And since these are activists that would have, the skill and wherewithal to do this, to look up voter rolls and make these fake applications, and probably would have the time to do it too, I think that's a real possibility to why it may not be so unreasonable what we're claiming at all. And if that's the case, it also explains why it's very hard to prove, because it's very disconnected and random. as these groups are. I mean, they're sort of loosely organized and they sort of work to a common purpose, but they're also like little individual cells, you know. And so that's a thought on where a lot of this corrupt voting could have come from. So if the data approach with the server doesn't turn out to be the answer, it could be just that. And I think it's quite credible. It's interesting, and nobody's mentioned this as a possibility either in the news that I've heard. I mean, the other possibility is like this claim of 40,000 votes that were brought in the middle of the night in Detroit. That almost sounds like that almost sounds like, I would say, a boiler room operation more than anything else. But again, you know, if they just voted Biden and nothing else on the ballot, and had 40,000 ballots and a team of people in a room that had some time to mark them all, that would be probably the way you do it real fast, you know, and then when nobody was there to, you know, stop them. And in fact, the observers have really been pushed out of the whole thing, as we've noticed. So I guess that kind of summarizes where we are. The other thing we have to look at now going forward is clearly those two races for Senate in Georgia. Those are high priority because if we win those, we can really shut down the worst of what the Democrats have planned for us, I think. And they also can protect the Supreme Court, which getting Amy Coney Barrett on the court is looking more and more like a brilliant move after all now, I think. And if they're there to protect the filibuster and therefore the Supreme Court, then the Supreme Court will be able to probably strike down a bunch of rash executive orders we might expect out of Biden administration. And that could be very, very good for us to, you know, build up for the future. And we've apparently done very well in the House. The exact numbers are still unclear, but it looks like that while Pelosi will probably remain Speaker, maybe, she may have trouble even getting that. And if she does, it's going to be a very weak majority, I think. So that's good. And that may prevent them from getting the bills passed that she wants passed, for instance. And maybe a little bit of that working across the aisle could happen. So that's very important and to really get involved. I mean, if you have any money to spare, I know money's tight, but you can put a little bit toward that campaign. Like I said in the last one, with a caveat I have that if you do it, you're going to get deluged with emails. They're crazy. They don't seem to have their computer all programmed to react to what you did and said, well, you just made a contribution today, so let's lay off for a couple of days before we ask again. You know, I mean, it's like if I make a contribution on one day, I'm sure as heck not planning on making a second one to the same outfit the same day. So anyway, but I'll do that, and we're coming to close here. Give me a like if you like these videos, and I really appreciate anybody that subscribes on YouTube, because that way you'll get them immediately. Otherwise, I've been posting links on Parler. I've been trying to get verified on Parler, but the verification thing seems to not be working for some reason. I'm having trouble with that. So, and that means I got to just put these links like I do. Make any comments. I'll see if anything interesting. I'll definitely try to respond. And that will be it for now.